The caves can often feel like it's out of reach of new players, with the tougher mobs, constant lack of sunlight, insanity, and seemingly sparse resources, and I know it definitely felt like that for myself for a long time, but it doesn't need to be that way. Today I'm going to show you not only how to survive in the caves, but how to thrive, and how to use it as a building block to really set yourself up on the surface as well. And before we take a look at what's waiting for us in the dark, I'd strongly advise you to bring at least a miner hat from the surface, as torches aren't really going to cut it down here. Darkness is the first obstacle that you'll need to overcome, and you need to be wary of which slot you use for your light source as well. Using your head slot will mean that you can no longer wear an umbrella or a helmet, and using a lantern instead will mean that you can't use a weapon or walking cane. So I actually recommend bringing one of each so you can switch them out depending on what you need at the time. You can also refuel both the miner hat and lantern very easily with light bulbs from light flowers that grow all over the caves. The time that you head into the caves is also worth taking note of. Spelunking in summer is without a doubt the best time, as you can escape the heat in the caves without a thermal stone. However, this is the only element that the caves will protect you from. Winter will still be cold and spring will still be wet down here, so plan accordingly. It's often the combination of darkness and the elements that will doom inexperienced players from the beginning. You'll probably want to bring some food as well, as trips down here tend to last a little longer than you expect. You might even end up spending the rest of your life here. But be careful what you bring, as you'll soon find that there are some ecologically conscious individuals living here. Bunnymen will be one of the first creatures that you encounter in the caves, and if you're carrying any meat products or eggs in your inventory, you will very quickly become an enemy of theirs. And sorry for those of you who play as Weber or Wartox, because you've been marked down on their hit list from day one. If you do want to avoid getting chomped on by the bunny brigade, you can always ditch the meatballs in favour of a vegetarian alternative, or just do your spelunking in the daytime when they're asleep. Bunnymen and bunny villages are, however, a fantastic source of both food and resources, and often are the building blocks for important things on the surface such as spider farms, sinkhole defences, bee queen farms, and more. You can even farm them yourself in caves by befriending one with the carrot and pretending to hit another bunnyman. But make sure that you don't actually land your blow, or else you have the entire horde coming after you instead. And it goes without saying that you don't want to pick up the meat that drops until the coast is clear. If your sanity drops below 40%, these innocent looking creatures will take on a much more sinister form. They can still be befriended and farmed in the same way, but will now drop monster meat instead of normal meat, and beard hair instead of bunny puffs. They also drain your sanity when nearby, whereas a friendly bunnyman will actually raise it. So for most intents and purposes, it's better to make sure your sanity is above the halfway mark when dealing with bunnymen. So let's actually explore some of the options of how to regain sanity in the caves. Since, unlike on the surface, your sanity is constantly draining down here, it won't be long before you'll be dealing with nightmare creatures if you don't have it under control. You can of course plan ahead and bring some sanity foods with you from above ground. Cooked cactus flesh is a particularly good one that's easy to collect a lot of. You can also bring clothing items like a tam or a top hat to try to balance out the sanity drain a bit. Either way, you'll most likely be needing a bit of a top off after a while. Straw rolls or fur rolls are a good idea, especially if you've been harvesting some bunnymen and have a bunch of bunny puffs at the ready. Fur rolls also give you a boost of health if you've taken a bit of damage, and have 3 uses instead of 1 for the straw roll. As far as cave sanity food goes, green caps and blue caps are probably as good as it's gonna get, unfortunately, but there are entire forests of mush trees. And of course, nightmare fuel is still an incredibly important resource, so being insane for a period of time, even in the caves, is not the worst thing in the world. And neither are the waves of depth worms, which are the hound waves of the caves. In the first year of the game, you'll only ever get at most 3 depth worms per person chasing after you, and no more than 2 in the first 50 days. And while they do hit harder than their overworld equivalent, I find that not only are they much easier to kite, especially in a group, but they give much more valuable loot as well. A single depth worm will drop 4 monster meat and a glowberry, which is used to make and refuel moggles. arguably the best player-worn light source in the game and a favourite tool of the veteran cave dweller. The strategy for fighting these guys is to first of all get them to group together if there are more than one so that they attack at the same time. You can do this by running around in wide circles. From there the pattern is dodge, 5 hits, dodge and lead them for a little bit, dodge, 5 hits again, rinse and repeat. If you don't lead them or don't lead them far enough, they will only let you do 2 hits the second time, which is still okay, but I find this is the best way to get more attacks in quickly. Of course, I would still recommend fighting with armor on. Log suits come in handy here as the head slot is often used for a light source. Otherwise you can throw a lantern on the floor, but that does restrict your movement a bit and I prefer to have the light source on my person if possible. If you do get really stuck with the depth worms, you can always just run away. They won't chase you very far, especially if you have a walking cane or some other speed boost. And after losing interest in fighting, they'll dive back into the ground, leaving a mysterious plant to show where they lay in waiting. The way to tell between the depth worms and the normal lesser glowberries is by checking to see if they are wet or not. Depth worms will always show as wet mysterious plants when you hover over them. If you want to make sure that the worms are dead but don't want to fight yourself, you could always lead them back to your bunnies, which will fight depth worms or any other monsters on site. Other potential allies are the rock lobsters, found in the Rocky Plains biome, which is also home to one of my favourite turfs, the Cave Rock turf. Unlike the bunnymen, these guys won't attack monsters on sight, but when provoked they can be quite powerful defenders. I personally don't normally seek these guys out unless I'm in a very desperate situation and I happen to be in the neighbourhood, and I never bring them back to my base as they are not only incredibly slow, but have a bad habit of eating all my rocks and minerals, including gems and thulecite. If you do however want to recruit some boulders to help you out in your underground exploits, feeding them rocks or flint is a very easy way of getting them to do your bidding. These guys are incredibly hard to take down. With 3600 HP, they can last a long time against pretty much all cave creatures, and if they do take too much damage, they simply turn into a boulder, which absorbs 95% of damage as they regenerate their health. They also behave like a herd, which means reproducing little baby lobsters that slowly grow larger as time passes, but don't be fooled by their cuteness. These herds will overrun your base if you let them, and as I mentioned, they can be very difficult to remove. Other creatures that you may encounter in the caves include spiders, of which there are a few varieties down here. There are the regular spiders and warriors, which mainly inhabit the green sections of the caves. Cave spiders and spitters are found in the stalagmite biome and spawn from stalagmites. The former is not very difficult to fight at all and will retreat into its shell where you can continue to hit it freely until it's dead. The spitter is a bit more dangerous and, as you can guess, does in fact spit at you from a distance, and I would advise fighting from close range instead as the bites are a bit easier to dodge. The only real reason for fighting these two spiders is so that you can mine the stalagmites for fossil fragments, of which they will drop 1 or 2 per den. Otherwise they can simply be avoided. And I would also be avoiding the dangling depth dwellers, which are basically spider warriors with a smaller range and spawned from webbed mush trees in mush forests. Basilisks are also creatures that I do not bother with, and besides the occasional sighting in the stalagmite biome, they tend to be found in their own secluded guano areas anyway. In fact, seeing a bat cave in guano turf is often a sign to turn back, and the bats themselves offer very little in terms of loot unless you're playing as Wormwood, and their caves cannot be destroyed. Slurtles and Snurtles are neutral creatures for the most part that spawn from Slurtle mounds when there are rocks nearby or after an earthquake. I say for the most part because Slurtles will attack you if you're carrying rocks or minerals, as that's what they tend to eat. As for practical uses for fighting these slugs, the Slurtles have a small chance of dropping the Shelmet, which is a sturdy helmet, and the Snurtles have a decent chance of dropping their shell armor, which you can hide inside to absorb 100% of damage. It also causes attackers to lose interest in you after a short period of time and can be quite useful for getting out of a tight situation, or even for tanking attacks with quick switching. The Snurtle, however, is only a 10% chance to spawn from any given mound, so make sure to hunt them down if you see one. The Slurtle slime that these slugs leave behind can be used to refuel your miner hat and lantern, or used as an explosive, dealing half the damage of gunpowder. And if you've encountered the Slurtles, then you've probably run into a few of these big tentacles as well. And while they do look quite horrifying, they really are harmless unless attacked, and I wouldn't advise doing so unless you plan on making your way through to the atrium to find Fuel Weaver. And that's probably not something that you want to be doing straight away. Nightmare fishes can also be found in the caves outside of the ruins, particularly in the stalagmite biome and guano areas, and depending on the size of the light emitted, can spawn a nightmare creature that will attack you if spotted. Another thing to keep an eye out for while out on your spelunking adventures is Starsky, a fish in a bowl that attracts Hutch. Hutch is basically Cave Chester, but can transform into a Fugu version if given a light bulb or glowberry and a spear, or a music box version if you replace the spear with a one-man band. And while his uses are quite straightforward, he can come in handy for storing meat-based food when dealing with bunnymen, and the Fugu version is relatively helpful in attacking the big tentacle and its baby tentacles. As for bosses down here in the caves, the only one that isn't found in the ruins or atrium is Toadstool, which can be summoned by chopping down the Toadstool cap. If you don't want to fight Toadstool, then don't chop it down. Antlion, while not being a cave boss, can generate cave-ins in summer, causing large boulders to fall around the player, and as long as you keep moving in one direction, they're quite simple to avoid, and killing Antlion will stop it from doing this entirely. So to sum up, caves in general are definitely worth your time early on in the game, especially to get some important equipment like moggles and lanterns. While the creatures you find down here are generally tougher than the ones upstairs, most if not all can be simply avoided, and as you get more accustomed with their fighting patterns and behaviours, will become less of a threat anyway. The caves are also a decent place for collecting resources such as those from bunny hutches, and even some things that may have become scarce above ground. Rocks and rocky turf are a few that come to mind in particular that tend to go quickly with a group of people playing. And as you head into the ruins and the atrium beyond that, you'll discover that the underground can be very valuable if you're up to the challenge. Unfortunately, the ruins and beyond is going to have to wait for another time, as this video is already quite long and there's a lot to unpack in there, but I did just want to thank you guys real quick for all the love and support on my last guide video. It ended up doing a lot better than I ever anticipated, and it's because of all the comments from you guys that I decided to make this video as a follow-up. So if you do have more things in Don't Starve Together that you'd want me to go over in a video, please leave a comment below, like the video if you enjoyed it, check out my Twitch channel if you want to watch me play live, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.